Hi there. This is part 2 in my video talking about homelessness in Canada. I'm going to talk a bit about the solutions and things we need to do, and maybe ways we need to start thinking differently. Okay, first thing I'm going to say is, I like to look at life positively and how I do things that way. And, I try not to be negative, but I have to say this. It's only going to get worse. It just comes to that. It's only going to get worse. And you know what? I don't see it changing probably for a good 20 or 30 years. And this is going to sound nasty, but it's pretty hard to refute. What we have here in Canada is a significant chunk of the population that's older. They're a very unified block of voters, and they've already got theirs. So basically, they're not going to vote for anything significant to change right now. Just as long as their investments are secure and nobody's meddling too much with them and they're being left alone, they really don't care what else happens to the country. It's unfortunate, but that's the way it is. So for the rest of us, we're just going to have to keep working and look at different ways to live until they're gone. It sounds terrible, but that's kind of the way it is. We got to wait for them to leave. It's just how it is. So while we're waiting, we got to consider what we're going to need to do to change things. And another thing to keep in mind too is the margin of error is going to change as far as ending up out on the street. It's going to be easier and easier and easier. Case example, and I used this in my part 1, I believe I mentioned this, that I remember seeing in an article where a working couple, both working professionals, one in the medical industry and the other one was an engineer of some kind, were having problems affording housing. My goodness, it's, these weren't I don't think they were a particularly young couple or anything like that. I can't remember just who they were, all the details. It was a while ago when I read it, and I was pretty disgusted. But that highlights that, if they're having problems, who isn't? Really is what it comes down to. There isn't much of a chance for anybody, and particularly young people. And they've had a real hard knock. Probably the past decade, they've taken the brunt of some of the terrible things that have happened, and are coming to a head now. So keeping that in mind, we need to be careful on how we point fingers. I think, in the future, it can be any of us. It really can be. Okay, so how do we fix this? And I'm talking about the long-term solutions. Okay, first things first. We need to abolish foreign ownership of Canadian interests. And I mean not just housing, I mean companies, resources, so on and so forth. This has been a sham. The whole concept of letting foreigners in to bring cash into our economy has not worked. There's all kinds of so-called reasonable arguments. End result, it doesn't work. It gets abused. It just doesn't work. Years ago, it was mostly just people from the United States buying properties here in Canada. And that goes back and forth. There was a quid pro quo going on there. Our economies are similar enough, I guess. We're relying on the U.S. to kind of survive. You know what? We are the fly. When the elephant rolls over, the fly's got to watch where it is, and that's the truth of the matter. But you know what? Our cultures are pretty similar. We're like the same color, but a different shade in a lot of the ways we think. We're family. We're friends. So it didn't cause a big problem. I don't remember it ever being a big problem. I don't so much see it now. Maybe in certain little bits and pieces, maybe so, but not something big enough to completely disrupt an entire country's housing market like what's happening right now. And maybe this is happening down in the States too. A lot of the reason I'm doing this is to also to not only put the Canadian content out, but to connect with people down in the States to say, hey, if, I don't know what your perceptions of Canada are, but here's what's happening here. Watch out. A lot of what's happening here could happen easily in your country. Or maybe it already has, I don't know. I don't follow too closely what's going on in the States, and I'm not there, so my impression is going to be very distorted. Anyway, we need to abolish foreign ownership of Canadian interests. We just need to cut it off. It's only going to get abused. Proof is in the pudding. And I'm going to say this about everything I'm saying. The proof is in the pudding. We can't allow it. Free trade. Oh my goodness, what a mess that has been. You know what? It all sounds reasonable. Just like trickle-down economics. All this sounds reasonable on the surface. In practice, boy does it suck. It really does not work. It is the biggest failure of any economist that wants to open his mouth and try and promote it. Guess what? 40 years of evidence says you're wrong. It's not working. Oh, it would have been much worse without it. Really? Let's try. Let's abolish it. Let's just get rid of free trade. And you know what? Between Canada and the US, I can understand a free trade agreement between our countries, or at least some form of trade agreement. It makes sense. We kind of have the same values. We kind of honor each other's laws. I like to think we do. I think it's important that we do because we are friends and family. We should go as far as honoring each other's laws, even if they're vaguely different and so on and so forth. We should say, no, if we're going to do business with them, we should honor what they believe. I think that's essential in being a family and, being a friend. That's the way we should act towards each other. And I think most Americans would agree with that. So free trade between the U.S. and Canada, not a big deal. You know what? I would hope they're going to eventually be a free country too. And I hope Canada will be eventually too. Some of the other countries we're dealing with, why on earth are we taking their money? That is dirty, dirty money. We have no business dealing with them. China. No business dealing with these guys. And you know what? This isn't a slam against people from China. You know what? If somebody from China comes to Canada and lives a Canadian dream, pays Canadian taxes, and is a citizen of Canada, you know what? I don't care where you're from. You're Canadian. I don't care if you're from Syria, anywhere in the Middle East, anywhere. You know what? As soon as you got that Canadian citizenship, or you're a resident that's paying taxes, so on and so forth, guess what? As soon as you are able to vote, you're a Canadian. I don't care where you're from. We're all from somewhere else. And you know what? We need that diversity. You know what? They could probably tell us what's going on. Some of these people from countries that have had problems are probably coming here and going, wow, I've seen this happen before. And I've seen what happens when it gets out of control, and you guys are on your way. Would they really say that? I don't know. It'd be interesting. So and you know what? That's very controversial to say abolish free trade. Why? Because there's a lot of money. There's a segment that's doing very well with it. Unfortunately, for most of us, it's really bad. Here in Canada, we had a program called the Temporary Foreign Worker Program. And if you're Canadian, you've heard of this. Whether you agree with it or not, you've heard of it. Years ago, the Temporary Foreign Worker Program was basically designed to look after seasonal farm workers, so on and so forth. Whether you agree with it or not, it didn't spin out of control. It stuck to about 60 to 80,000 per year, and they were just that. They were pretty much seasonal. They weren't here all the time, and you know what? It didn't seem to cause a lot of problems. It wasn't this horrible abomination that it's turned into now. What do I mean? Well, the past government, the ones that called themselves conservatives, they weren't by any stretch of the imagination. They were fiscal progressives. I think the only way they were conservatives in maybe some small social policies or whatever, in a kind of a disgusting sort of way. You know what? I'm probably somebody who would typically if there was a real conservative party, would maybe vote for them. I cannot highlight my dislike for these jokers. They were absolutely vile. Anyway, they took the temporary foreign worker program at a time of chronic unemployment here in Canada. And I need to highlight that. There was no reason for this program to swell. It grew from the 60 to 80,000 to well over 400,000. And there's no real clear figure at this point, because one of the things they also did was kind of muzzle the census information, so on and so forth. So I don't think there's we really know exactly how far it is spun out of control. History will tell us for sure, I think. But I think at last count it was well over 400,000, and it's probably going to end up to be much higher than that. Now again, to anybody from the United States that's watching this, because let's face it, I get a lot of US viewers watching my content, this doesn't seem like a big number. Well, guess what? Canada has a really small population compared to the States. That is a massive number. They basically, in one fell swoop, shut an entire generation of people coming into the workforce out of their jobs. And if they didn't shut them entirely out of their jobs, they sure suppressed wages across the board. It was the most vile act, short of losing currency control, that a government has done to the Canadian people. Pretty much tantamount to treason in my books. And those are really strong words to say in public. And that's honestly what I believe. I can comfortably say that if you look up the definition of treason, that's what they committed. And before anyone who votes liberal or whatever, guess who passed up control of our currency way back when, in pre-1974? And I'll hit that in a moment. So don't get too cocky. You know what? This problem crosses the political spectrum. And that's the problem. So, abolish the temporary foreign worker program. Canadian jobs for Canadians. Go figure. That needs to happen. You know what? There's small extenuating cases where it would probably be beneficial to bring workers from a different country into Canada to cover our needs for something specific until we can get people trained up. That sounds reasonable. Unfortunately, again, proof is in the pudding. If we allow such a program to exist, it will be abused. So we can't have it. It sounds terrible, but this is why we can't have nice things. It's not going to work. It will get abused sooner or later. So we just have to close the gate completely. No, it can't happen. I'm sorry. Anyone who may benefit from it, problem is you're going to abuse it sooner or later and turn it into just a dreadful thing. Never mind to how the people that we brought in, how they were treated. And, do a quick scan for news stories and see how some of these temporary foreign workers were treated. Absolutely dreadful. This should not be allowed on Canadian soil. The people who did it should probably get thrown behind bars and stay there for the remainder of their natural life. Slavery should be treated that way. It's absolutely disgusting that this happened on Canadian soil. And this is, again, why I would never, never again vote for that particular party that allowed that to happen. You've shown your true course. Until there's a rise and something changes in that political party, it is not viable. Absolutely not. They're absolute criminals. Anyway, moving along. Strong views, I realize, but there it is. We need to abolish corporate political donations and lobbying, quite bluntly. To my understanding, democracy should be one vote, one person. One person, one vote. What we have right now is closer to $1, one vote. That's not democracy. That's something else entirely. It is just that simple. The last point, and this is probably the strongest point, and this was a failing point for both Canada and the United States. And, I kind of think this was a trigger moment where, all these supporters of the Second Amendment, where the heck were you when this happened in your own country? I hate to be critical and I hate to be nasty, but that was letting the control of your currency fall to somebody other than your government. You let private industry take control of that. You sold your country from under your own feet. All these Second Amendment rights and, being armed to protect yourself, it didn't even need to come to that. You just needed to probably get together, speak up, and stop it. Where were you? Kind of blows all that out of the water, unfortunately. You should have never let that happen, and neither should we have. You know what? I've written it down. I'm going to quote something. It's kind of long, so I had to write it down. This is by a prominent Canadian, and similar things have been said by other very wise people. This was said quite a long time ago. Until the control of the issue of currency and credit is restored to government and recognized at its most conspicuous and sacred responsibility, all talks of the sovereignty of Parliament and democracy is idle and futile. Who said this? A lot of people can probably guess, Canadians particularly. William Lyon Mackenzie King, 1874 to 1950. One of my favorite people in history in Canada. And this basically says, and you know what, he's not the only one to have said this. I believe this is, some of the pillars of the U.S. Constitution said a similar thing in different words. And we've heard this before, and I'm pretty sure there's passages in the Bible that kind of allegate to something similar too. So that, these, in the past and all throughout, they've warned us on this. Don't let this happen. And here we let it happen. And here we are today. We're talking about homelessness among people that go to work every day, so on and so forth. I just don't know what more to say on it, you know what I mean? And I don't see any of this changing until we get that one thing knocked off and then start working on the rest of the items. The first thing we need to do is get the government control of currency. Defund the ones that are doing all the lobbying and political donations. Once we defund them, then we can further block it happening again by removing it being able to do that. It's like my list kind of has to work in reverse. Why aren't politicians willing to address this? The money. Follow the money. That's really what it comes down to. And, who was it that here in Canada that let the currency control fall to private industry? Well, that would have been Prime Minister Trudeau back in 1974, the Liberal Party. And the thing was, there wasn't too many voices of dissent either. Everyone was pretty much, oh yeah, this is a great idea. You know what? They're all rubbing their hands going, wow, we're going to make, it's like I say, politics is so polarized, but it's ironic because really what you get is the same thing. You get different shades or whatever of small pieces, but the problems remain the same. And I see this happening down in the States too. So, right now I'm dating this video, I guess. There's an election going on, and on opposite ends of the political spectrum, there's voices of dissent that kind of has a status quo up in arms, frightened and running scared. So it's kind of amusing. Unfortunately, I don't see anything like that happening here in Canada because, like I say, we have a voting bloc that's got theirs. They're comfortable, and it's not going to happen the way our system works. And until we get the money out of politics, it's going to stay that way. Like I say, 20 or 30 years. So, what's the solution to homelessness? Go back to the whole title of my video. This all keys in. All these reasons are why we can't let private industry interfere with our solutions. They're only going to cause more problems in the end. And it's just not going to work. They aren't part of the solution, they're part of the problem. We need to remember that. And to a certain degree, so is the whole not in my backyard syndrome. The people that do that are part of the problem. We need to keep their say out of it. We really do. We need to isolate them and say, you know what? You're never going to help. They're never going to have a solution. They're just going to say, well, yeah, it's a problem, but not with me. You know what? We need to stop listening to them entirely. They just don't count. And the same with private industry. They just don't count. They're the cause of our problems. Why are we involving them in the solution? Now, what do I mean by saying that? Having pull somebody off the street and shoving them into traditional housing just isn't going to work, because that traditional housing eventually isn't going to work for us either, as far as I'm concerned. So we need to put them into alternatives, because I think that's where the rest of us are going to end up before too long. So we need to look at micro housing and all the other alternatives, such as this. Now, for somebody off the street, you know, the kind of density micro housing is probably the way to go. It really is. It's the best thing I can think of. The only big problem with it is, you know what, it's very economical to do all that. The only problem is the NIMBYism. So we need to find a way to work around that. Have people done that? Yes, actually they have. Like I say, in Alberta, a city solved homelessness by providing homes to everybody. How they did this, I have no idea. I'm sure the logistics for doing it, getting the money, the place to construct everything or find a spot must have been very difficult. The real battle, I'm sure, was fighting the communities that this needed to be put in. How they solved the rampant NIMBYism, I have no idea. Again, I really don't like these people. So I think really the answers are going to be alternatives to microhousing. It just has to be. Stuffing somebody in a bachelor apartment when working professionals can barely afford them isn't going to work. It's just going to eventually cause more problems later on down the road. And I see microhousing so much as a positive. Let's face it, most microhousing alternatives are larger than what I'm living in now. So, you know what, I hold a pretty decent job. I live well and whatever, and I'm in a much smaller space and happy for it. It might be the way to help people solve their problems. Simplicity in life really makes it easier to deal with all the other problems, I think. Anyway, if you have questions or comments or whatever, please do leave them below. My only, a lot of what I'm talking about is fairly controversial, and I expect most people aren't going to agree with significant portions of what I've said. And you know what? That's totally cool. What I really want to see is a conversation on this, particularly on outside of traditional media sources, because, well, we can't trust them either. So, YouTube it is. And what I'd like to say is, you know what? If you're sitting there typing a wall of text, stop. Don't. Throw a video up. Most people have smartphones. These things are able to take video. It doesn't have to be pretty. The content just needs to be there. If I'm able to produce a video, anybody can, is really what it comes down to. I'm terrible at this. I'm dreadful at it. Look at my videos. They're bad, but I'm hoping my content kind of balances it and there's something worthwhile there. Anyway, this video has been way too long or whatever already, according to my usual fare. From Vancouver Island, Victoria, BC. Have a great day.